Okay, welcome, everybody, to what is going to be a pretty amazing online event. Here's what's going to make it amazing. So the topic and the hosts. So today you're going to learn how to build a prospecting machine that generates qualified opportunity after qualified opportunity, just like clockwork. This is like a systems level webinar that you're attending today. And you're going to learn specifically three pillars of what makes up this machine. You're going to learn process, which is kind of like the engine. You're going to learn productivity, which is kind of like the transmission. And then you're going to learn quality and message, which is kind of like the fuel. So that's for lack of a better analogy, that's the analogy that I'm going with. And I've got with me two really, really amazing sales leaders. So we have Colin Cadmus, and I'm going to let them both introduce themselves in a second, but I do want to say a couple things about them that I know they wouldn't say about themselves because they're really humble. Colin has become kind of like the voice of sales on LinkedIn in this last year. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, do so. He gets hundreds, often thousands of likes on everything he says, and he says some very, very insightful stuff that's relevant for both out of college people that are looking for their first SDR job, all the way up to a tenured chief revenue officer. And we also have Julianne Thompson, who runs an SDR team at Outreach. And Outreach has recently joined the billion-dollar valuation club with the likes of Slack and all these unicorn billion-dollar companies. So you should be very excited to hear from all of us today. It's kind of the trifecta of what makes a really good prospecting program. But I will let each of those superstars introduce themselves just briefly, and we will get into the content very shortly here. So Julianne, it's all you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. Like Chris mentioned, my name is Julianne Thompson. I'm over at Outreach, opened our Tampa office 2 years ago. I manage a sales development team of outbound prospectors, as well as our marketing development team, which handles our inbound interest. So really excited to have this conversation with these two fellows today.
And now we've got Colin. There's one more thing I'll say about Colin. Apparently he's pretty sick today. You would never know it. He sounds amazing. I gotta say that alone makes him a superstar, because if I was sick, I would be bailing on all of you guys right now, just frankly. But Colin, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Yeah, Colin Cadmus, VP of Sales. Appreciate the kind intro. First webinar and under the weather, but pulling it together here, and excited to be here, particularly with these two companies. But I think bringing Gong and Outreach and Aircall together, not only does it fit exactly what we're going to talk about, but couldn't be two bigger names to bring together with us. So I'm excited.
You see, everybody, you would never know the guy's sick. You would never know it. You sound great, Colin. Okay,
Thanks,
and then we've got myself. I run product marketing over at Gong. We're the #1 conversation intelligence platform for sales teams. But as far as intros, I think that is just about enough. So here's what you're going to learn today. Like I said, we kind of already talked about this, but we went through the introductions. You're going to learn the three pillars that make up a super successful prospecting program. Okay, we're talking systems level thinking here. And at the very end, you're going to have the opportunity to ask all three of us questions. There should have been a chat sent out to you in the GoToWebinar box that asked you to submit your questions throughout. This is another call to action to do that, and we'll address all of those at the end. So we're going to start with the first pillar, which is process, and Julianne is going to address pillar #1 for you. So take it away, Julianne.
All right, here we go. So like Chris mentioned, we're going to kick things off today talking about the pillar of prospecting, which is process. So we're going to break this down into 3 different sections. The first is figuring out who should I be targeting. So when we do this, we look at both target accounts as well as personas. So at the center of this, we're looking at our hit list. So these are what you would consider your target accounts. They're cherry-picked top prospects. I would recommend about 20 per account executive. You'll see later that these are going to be contacts that are really high touch. You're putting in a lot of manual labor. So you want to be very selective about this hit list of target accounts. Your ideal customer profile is going to be just a band outside of that, which are companies that you've identified that share a size, an industry, and maybe a location of what most successful customers look like today. And then out of that, I call that the outside of ICP or testing zone. And so you want to select companies that may have aspects of some of your ideal customer profiles. Maybe they're in a different industry, but they might be in a different location. Or maybe they're the size or the workflow makeup of your ideal customer profile, but it may be in a different vertical. So we still want to target those. We're going to put in less manual labor and more of a casting a wider net for those as well. So that's the 3 different tiers of accounts. So we'll talk more about how you should target each of those and with what velocity. But also want you to consider your personas per account. So we recommend that you have 3 to 5 target personas. Here at Outreach, we have 5 different people that we reach out to within the organization. But you classify them into 3 different sections. So the first is going to be your economic buyers. These people's titles typically start with a C or a V. And the thing that's unique about them is they have the ability to shift budget from one project to another. So you know you've got the economic buyer on the phone if that person has the ability to say, hey, we haven't budgeted for this, but this is something that's going to actually be more in line with our revenue goals or the goals we're trying to accomplish here. The second layer of personas is direct managers. This is actually my favorite entry point. They're typically a little easier to get a hold of, and they also have influence to that economic buyer, and they understand the pain points of the higher business level, but they also get the day-to-day. You know, they're on the ground typically with their direct oversights, and they have an understanding of the challenges that your product or solution solves. So there's 3 different sections, but we usually try to find 3 to 5 personas. Here at Outreach, for example, we'll target sales leadership, sales management, sales operations, sales enablement, and marketing. So I would encourage you to identify who those 3 to 5 are within each of your target accounts. All right, and you can see a visualization here. So as I mentioned, the core of it is that hit list. Those are your super high target accounts. Outside of that, ICP, your bread and butter, you know that these types of companies can use and benefit from your services. And then outside of that is your testing zone. But I want to take a second to talk about two different things that are important with this. So you're delegated to who you sound like. If I'm talking to a mid-level manager and I'm talking about very tactical feature functionality, they're probably going to actually push me down chain. But if I'm talking about the high-level business solutions that are high-level business problems that my company solves for, they're going to push you up the chain to the B-level, C-level type person. So no matter where you start, you want to make sure that you're constantly moving up and moving up quickly to get those decision makers in the buying cycle earlier. I think it's also important to understand that you should target multiple people at the same time, so that if I'm having a conversation with my manager, they can say, hey, I just got this email from this company, or I just got this phone call. Do you know anything about this? And you start to surround that account so that all of a sudden your company's name is coming up in internal conversations more often than not. All right, so now that you've tiered out your different accounts, and then you also have an understanding of the personas of each account that you should target, there are 3 different ways that you should vary your velocity and messaging, as well as channel. So your tier 1, again, these are your top, let's say 20 accounts. That might not be the right number for your company, but that's usually a good starting point. It's highly manual. You're looking at the prospect's LinkedIn. You're figuring out if they used to work for a company that's a current customer. You're putting in more manual touch points in terms of you're making phone calls. All of your emails are personalized. You're sending them swag. You're sending them videos, whatever it takes to get that person's attention, because you know that if you end up getting into that account, all your teammates are going to be high-fiving you, and they're super happy that you got into one of these accounts. From there, for more of your ideal customer profile type accounts, you're going to still do personalization in your emails. You're still going to be making a lot of phone calls in between. Here at Outreach, and this is pretty common across the industry as well, we schedule about 70% of our calls on the phone. So we want to make sure that we're still making phone calls, outbound phone calls to these tier 2 type of accounts and personas. And again, still a lot of humanization there. And then the third is more of our testing zone. And what we do there is personalization at scale. So I may not be researching and reading every single LinkedIn profile and where they went to college and who their kid plays soccer for, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding what are the challenges that specific persona faces that my product solves for. And so when you write out your sequences or your emails and you're making your phone calls, you're staying on a talk track that's specific to that person's persona. And that way you can create that idea of personalization at scale without spending as much time as you would on a tier 1 or tier 2 account. All right, so create, test, and improve. I'm really big on, like, if somebody asks me, what's the best way to do this? What's the best way to do that? I just say, I don't know, test it. So it's going to be different for my company as is for everybody who's listening today, but you want to make sure that you have a great system of testing and training, and being agile in this is super important. So I'll give you an example here at Outreach. When I first started a couple years ago, we were very high volume. So everything that we were doing was more of that personalization at scale, where we would read into the challenges of the specific persona. And it was more dials, more conversations, more meetings, more money. I think a lot of us that grew up in sales development probably had that same type of method. But over the last 2 years, this guy named Sam Nelson, I'm sure a lot of you listening probably know, developed something called the Agogi program. And that was twofold. One, it was having that personalization in the first email. So he was teaching the SDRs to come in and see what aspects of their LinkedIn profile or something about their job description might be worth reaching out to you on. And then the second aspect of that was testing in small batches. Anytime you make a big change, you don't want to change everything at one time. So you want to make sure that you're testing in small batches, and then you can compare their performance with others. Sam's Agojis came in, started kicking everyone's tail, and so we started learning from the newbies, if you will. So we started changing our process over time. And then I'm really big on ongoing training. I lead the SDR initiatives here for ongoing training across our entire org. Couple takeaways here: pick a theme each month. Don't jump around in terms of what you're focusing on. Last month, we focused on account research and personalization. This month, we're talking about how to get really good on the phone. So we're talking about objection handling and that persona-based messaging. And next month, we're going to be talking about SDR and AE alignment. So make sure you have a theme for the month. And pick subject matter experts, mix it up. So I'm not up there teaching training every day. It's going to be a mix of everybody. I've had customers come in, other people from within the organization come in. And then last, practice 2 to 3 times a week, at least when they're newer. Probably want to be doing a lot more than that, but just make sure that they're continuously honing their skills. That's all I got.
Julianne, that was absolutely great. I think I would have taken a bunch of notes if I had the opportunity to, and I had a notepad in front of me right now. My favorite part was the testing process that you guys deploy. It's so obvious in hindsight, but I think so few organizations actually do that. So thank you so much for contributing your value, your leadership, and your thoughts. We are going to pass the torch over to Colin to address pillar number 2 of a massively successful prospecting program, and that is productivity. That is the transmission of the system. So Colin, I will let you take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Julianne. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so second pillar of prospecting is productivity, right? So anyone who follows my content or hears me teach anything or has heard me speak, I like to keep things really, really simple. I think it comes from my background in sales training. The simpler you can make something, the easier it is to understand. Ties right into what Julianne said. And so when it comes to productive salespeople, try to just zoom out and think about what are the ingredients of a productive salesperson. Now you can get into the nuances and we'll dive into a little bit of them, but from the high level, it's 2 things, right? You start with the responsibility of the sales leader, which is creating standard operating procedures. And then the second piece is on the sales rep. Once those are created, you have to now have salespeople who can execute on them. So I'll dive in a little bit right now into how I break those down. So SOPs are standard operating procedures. If you haven't heard the term, you need to get familiar with it. Your job as a sales leader is to design, to document, and then to teach your SOPs, all right? And designing it is creating your process. This includes creating your scripts, deciding which tools you're going to use, deciding exactly how many of what activity your sales reps are going to be doing each day. What do they need to accomplish before 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 p.m., etc. And again, it ties right into what Julianne said. I think a lot of people are already doing this, maybe calling it something else. So first, you're designing that. If you're a sales leader and you're in charge of scaling a team, very first thing you're going to do is try to figure out what that process is so you can teach it to everyone else. After you figure it out, you document it, right? This is where your sales playbook comes into play. You're also going to have your cadences, your templates, and everything built out in Outreach or whatever tools you're using. This way, it is all in one place. It's documented. There's no debating what the right element is. And then you're going to teach it. And I'll go back to document for just 1 second. What Julianne touched on is when you're testing things, test small things at a time. And that's for a very specific reason, right? So that you know exactly what is actually making an impact. If you test 20 changes in a process at once and you see that the sales go up or the sales go down or whatever metric you're trying to push, you don't know which change actually played a role in that. And so test things one at a time, then document them, work them into your process. It's also a heck of a lot easier to train your reps on a change to the process when it's just one small little change at a time. So that's to the third point, which is teaching. Sorry, no, it's fine. You can go ahead. Which is teaching, right? You have to now teach it to them, make sure that they understand it. Now the ball is in the rep's court. Of course, there's still coaching and there's training and there's managing and there's all those things that continue to go on every single day. But at this point, for a rep to become productive, they have to be able to execute. And so it starts with learning, right? You've documented everything. You have designed the playbook, you have put it together, you have taught it effectively. Now they need to learn it, they need to absorb it, they need to understand it, and that's 100% on the rep. All right, so if you're a rep and you have all of these resources at your fingertips, your managers have designed world-class playbooks that work for other reps on the team, it's on you to learn it. They can't do that for you. And then again, Julianne touched on this as well, practice, right? So once you've learned it, you have to practice it. That is literally the key to success in sales. You're going to do things over and over and over. And that's kind of the beauty of our job is practicing every single day. You can sit home and you can set aside time to practice, but all day, every day, you're practicing it, you're getting better at it, and you're implementing it. You're performing the process every single day. And the most important piece on implementing and executing is that you're sticking to the process. I talk about this all the time. You see this happen. We all know what the sales roller coaster is, right? You're having a bad week or you're having a bad day or a bad month. And the intuition that we have is to think something's wrong with the process. I have to change. I have to start doing something else. And so you come in tomorrow and you start testing your own script. You start going against everything that you've been taught, but you're forgetting the simple fact that you're only in control of 50% of what happens in a sales process. The other 50% is on the prospect, right? Maybe you're reaching the wrong person. It's not going to work on everyone. And so when I say implement it, I mean implement it exactly every single day, whether you're succeeding or failing. Keep doing it until you're coached or trained to do otherwise. And that is what will lead you to success and avoid that roller coaster as often as possible. All right, so I like to talk about this a little bit because it ties really well into the three hosts of the event today, the modern sales leader's reality. So I've realized, and this has happened even more, I would say, in the last 2 years, but it's kind of been a reality for a while. There are so many sales tools coming to the market. And a lot of them, most of them, many of them are really exciting and they're really tempting to buy. I would like to think that 3 of us on here represent 3 of those tools. But as a sales leader, when I talk about designing those SOPs, you really have to zoom out and you have to avoid the initial temptation to just start signing up for things because it actually causes more chaos. If you start signing up for things without figuring out how it works into your SOPs, where it exactly fits into your process, and designing that before you roll it out, you can avoid those types of issues and you can keep things simple. And so it doesn't mean don't sign up for awesome sales tools. It means make sure you're thinking through exactly how it works into your process, how it's going to integrate into those workflows, and that you're creating all of that documentation for your reps so that you can train them, teach them, and have them off to the races rather than just signing up for 3 cool tools this month and giving login passwords to your reps. And then they're just all over the place, right? They're going from tab to tab. They're bouncing from app to app. They're copying and pasting information from one place to another. They're maybe logging information in multiple places. And this is a big piece where sales operations comes into place. So modern sales leaders, you have to zoom out. You have to plan this stuff in advance. You have to really think through it. Don't make super quick decisions when it comes to signing up for tools. Take the time to make sure you're purchasing things that work well together, that play nice together, and that you're designing that roadmap, that playbook, all of that documentation so that you can teach it to your reps and have a flawless playbook and have a flawless process for them. So stay disciplined, right? This ties a little bit more into that. So less is more. Again, when it comes to the tech stack, I've been a victim. I've definitely made this mistake myself of signing up for too many things, and it actually overcomplicates things. So again, zoom out and pick the right tools that can do as much as possible of the process, and then you're able to have your reps working in less places. The more tools they have to bounce around to, the worse it is. And again, if those tools don't integrate together, they don't play nice together, you're just making the process harder, and that comes straight back to productivity, right? Your reps all day are bouncing around from app to app, from tab to tab. So integrations are absolutely key. For me, it's the number one thing that I look at now when I'm assessing a new tool. Do they integrate into everything that I have? And not only do they integrate into everything, but is that a core part of what that business is working on? Are their product team, are they constantly focused on building new integrations? Are they trying to stay integrated with everything? If they are, it's probably a tool that'll work for you for the long term. And then last is analytics will tell, right? You have to, and I think Julianne touched on this as well, you have to be able to measure everything. So it ties into number two with the integrations. If you're performing activities in outreach, for example, you want to be able to measure those, let's say in Salesforce or wherever you're measuring the rest of your data. And so analytics are key. They're going to tell you if you're succeeding or failing, and you have to measure them and measure them small changes at a time, like Julianne said, so you know exactly what the result is that each change got you or that each new tool got you, and you're able to perfect the process and maximize productivity. So how do I assess my vendors? So I look for a few things, like I said a million times already, integration friendly, right? Are they plugging into tools? Excuse me. I went a long time without doing that. I had to come. So are they integration friendly? And then the second one usually catches people by surprise that I put this here, so I'll explain it, but not the least expensive, right? And it doesn't mean sign up for the most expensive tool. What it means is look out for the biggest red flag when you're purchasing is that they are selling on price and they're telling you that they're cheaper than XYZ competitor. It is a red flag that you cannot ignore, and for two reasons, right? Number one, if they're selling on price, then something's wrong with their value prop in comparison to what the competition can offer you, and you should care about that. On the other hand, if you're buying the cheapest tool, if that's just the way that you're shopping, you're just looking for the best deal, you're probably buying the tool for the wrong reason too. And so if you're buying a productivity tool, you're buying a tool that's supposed to make your salespeople better, remember how much you're already investing in your team, right? You're investing probably millions of dollars a year in office space and salaries and commission, in training, in management leadership. Don't go cheap on the tools. When you do the math, the difference between the best tool and the least expensive value tool is very, very small in the big picture of things. So always pay attention to that and use that as a bit of a benchmark. It doesn't mean don't negotiate, and it doesn't mean don't try to get the best deal ever, because that's definitely the end of that process. Always get the best deal you can, but avoid those least expensive tools that are being brought to the market in that way. And the third thing is look at companies that are well funded and well established. This is really important, right? There's a lot of cool tools again out there, but as we know about startups, they can come and go and they can pivot to something completely different, a year after you sign up or 6 months after you sign up. So give them some time to really establish themselves in the market. Give them some time to make sure that they've raised good capital. You know that their mission is very clear. They know what direction they're headed in, because when you go back to everything that I just said and you remember that you have to write your SOPs, you have to document them, you have to train them, you have to create a playbook. Changing tools should be a lot of work for you, and then you have to teach it to your reps who then have to adapt to using a whole new tool. So make sure that the tools that you're signing up for have kind of passed that milestone. You know that they're not going anywhere. You know they're not going to drastically change tomorrow everything that they're doing, so that you don't end up having to redo all of your work again. And so that leads me to, you got a salesperson on a webinar, so I have to drop in a little bit of selling here. So it's kind of a bit of a teaser and an announcement. So earlier this year, we launched our integration with Gong, which we've been using internally, and it's amazing. I was a skeptic for all the reasons that I just said, I'm super cautious about adding new tools. Does it just make more work for us? Does it just cost more money? But our inside sales manager pushed really hard for me to look at it, and it's a tool I can't believe I lived without now, and now we have it plugged straight into Aircall, which is really cool. So anyhow, shouting that out a little bit. And then the next piece, which is coming soon, which I'm super excited to announce, is Outreach will be integrating into Aircall and vice versa. This is the first time I believe that any tool of that nature has integrated into an outside phone system. I thought it was really interesting because Julianne said that 70% of their meetings are scheduled over the phone, and that's crazy, right? Because they're selling mostly an email tool. They also make calls from it, of course, as well, but it shows how important it is to have that multi-touch cadence. And so as integrations are a huge part of our mission here, I know they are of Outreach and Gong as well. We're excited to announce that is coming soon. It's going to be launching very, very soon, I believe within the next week, and we'll be sending out updates and whatnot on that. And yeah, that is, I believe my last slide, or no, I think I have one more call out here, which is if you want to learn more about anything that I talked about, whether it's Aircall, whether it's Gong, whether it's Outreach, just drop demo in the chat box. If you want to write specifically next to it, also if it's Outreach, Gong, or Aircall, or all of the above that you want to learn about, we will make sure to get in touch with you. But thank you very much. Back to you, Chris.
Colin, I have to say that your walking pace is my running pace. If we had a live in-person audience right now, you would just deserve a massive round of applause because you just went really hard. You delivered some massive value and insights and leadership to everybody, and you did it all while under the weather. And might I add, you only paused to take a breath one time, so that was pretty amazing just to watch.
Aside from cough for like an hour after this.
Yeah, loved your thoughts on the standard operating procedure. Again, it's something that's so important, but I think so few sales organizations implement. And then, of course, your message around don't buy the cheapest thing out there. I think a lot of people have been burned by that. So it's good to hear somebody who has experience making purchases like that voice that message. So we are going to get into the third pillar today. You probably saw a change up in visual identity. That's what we do here at Gong. We're going to talk about quality and messaging. So you've so far learned how to kind of build the system, how to make it more productive. And now we are going to talk about how to fuel it. So one quick note, stay tuned until the very end. This should only take, I would guess, 12 to 15 more minutes, but we are going to be giving away one free ticket to Surf and Sales this year. This is a sales leadership and rep conference hosted in Costa Rica. I believe it's in September this year. I want to say September 10th. I'm going to tell you how you can enter to win that ticket at the very end here, but I unfortunately can't go because I'm going to be at another conference. So we're giving away my ticket. Normally this costs $3,500. That includes hotel, the conference, all food. The only thing you have to pay for is your flight. So this is pretty massive. So let's talk about it. The third pillar to prospecting success is your message, or the quality of your message. And the way I think about this, and this analogy should be no surprise to anybody yet, is your prospecting system is like a race car. Okay, you've got the process, which is the engine. You've got productivity, which is like the transmission. And then you've got fuel, which makes the entire thing move forward. It gives it its forward motion. And this is true for all three pillars, not just the third pillar, which I'm talking about. But if you are missing the message, if you're missing the fuel, or you have bad fuel going into the race car, you'll look like this guy. You're going to be manually pushing your race car, and competitors are going to zip right past you, assuming they have a more crisp, more resonant message. So I'm going to teach you just a few steps on how to craft your own highly resonant message. We implement this stuff internally, and it's been massively successful for us. And this should be no surprise to you because both of our guests so far have at least implied that this is incredibly important. Start with your buyer. Do not ever write a single line of messaging or script or sales call, anything, until you know your buyer very deeply. They provide you the raw material to craft the message. And if you don't know your buyer, you're just making things up. So I would recommend you screenshot this slide and just return to it every 3 months or 6 months throughout your entire go-to-market career. The business that wins is the business that understands their audience the best. This was said to me by a mentor about 5 years ago, and every year that passes in my career, I realize how much more true it is than I realized the previous year. So what makes a buyer persona useful for sales? That's what we're talking about here, is understanding your buyer, crafting a buyer persona. The most important important part of this is that it's based on reality. I see so many product marketing, sales, and other organizations crafting buyer personas because they think it's a check the box piece of internal collateral for their sales team that they just simply need to provide. And so they go write it up as if they're writing a piece of sales collateral, and they just deliver it without having interviewed a bunch of customers, a bunch of buyers, a bunch of prospects, scouring G2 Crowd and product reviews to understand how people are valuing the product and the value proposition. The most important thing you can do, even if you get the document or the structure wrong, is to base your buyer personas on reality, which means talk to people, hear what they're saying. And just a few elements that you want to include in those interviews and in your buyer persona enablement material is, of the 3 to 5 buyer personas, or maybe 6 to 8, depending on what your market demands, what is their pain? What's their desired end result or their gain? Based on those two elements, what are the talk tracks and messages you can equip sales and sales development with to resonate and speak to those pains and gains? And finally, what are the objections that are repeatably voiced by each buyer persona, and how can you enable your sellers to address those? And one quick note on objections, especially when it comes to buyer personas, you might have to write down the objections along a few different dimensions. You should write objections that are coming up by persona, but you should also surface objections that are coming up throughout the different stages of your sales process. So you've got kind of two different dimensions, because you're going to see very different objections at the beginning of your sales process, which is what we're talking about on this webinar primarily, and you're going to see different objections toward the middle and at the end of your sales process. So that is step one. Your action item before you even get started on step two is, if you haven't, go talk to a few customers, make sure you understand the problem or the opportunity your solution helps them address before you craft your message. Now, assuming you've done that and you haven't treated that as a check the box item, and you've treated it as the strategic activity that it is, the most effective principle of messaging that I have ever worked with is to build your message around what we call a nexus. So what is a nexus? A nexus is a polarizing insight that changes how your buyer thinks or feels about the problem or the opportunity you help them address. Okay, so if you're familiar with challenger sale, the commercial reframe, the reframe is it's not the same thing as a nexus. A nexus is a little more broad than that, but it's a type of nexus, okay? You're reframing how they think about either a problem or opportunity. And a great example of a nexus, and this seems obvious to everybody today because they were so successful with it, but back in 2007, it wasn't so obvious. HubSpot's nexus circa 2007. Nobody thought this way at the time. And their nexus was outbound marketing is dead. Inbound marketing is how you're going to generate leads. So if you think about the problem or opportunity, you start with that, which is generating leads for your business. They are changing the way you think about that problem or opportunity by saying outbound marketing is dead. It's spam. Buyers hate it. The new way to do this, especially because of the internet, is what we call inbound marketing, and I would love to teach you more. So there are a few attributes of an effective nexus, and I'll give you one more example before we move on. The first one, which I've said a few times, is it changes how your buyer thinks about the problem or the opportunity your solution helps them address. Number two, it shakes their confidence a little bit. It should get them to, at minimum, start to think, I've never really thought about it that way. Three, and this is most important, it's polarizing. 80% of the people you deliver that nexus to will absolutely agree and love you for it, but maybe 10, 15, or 20% of the people in the audience that you serve are actively turned off and will disagree. That's not only okay, that is what you want. That's how you know you have something powerful, and that's going to cut through the clutter. Now, you want to make sure you have the ratio there, right? You don't want 50% of the people hating and disagreeing with you because of your nexus, but if you can get somewhere close to the range of 80-20, you know you have something powerful. And then finally, and this is where I see most great nexuses, if that's a word, nexi, go to die. The marketing team waters it down. They don't make it binary enough. So I'll give you an example of one nexus we use on our sales team over here at Gong. It is product differentiation is dead. Today you win with how you sell, not what you sell. That is the nexus we lead with when we sell to a certain market segment. That's very binary. I'm saying product differentiation is dead. Here's what to do instead. Most people, if they took that exact same nexus and tried to deploy it through their organization, would water it down, and it would sound something like product differentiation just doesn't work so well. It kind of works, but not really as well as it used to. And actually today, the best way to differentiate is through what you say in your sales conversations. That sentence has been totally stripped of its power when you do not create a binary element to the nexus. So, and that was the final example before we move on, which is the one we use when selling into competitive markets. Product differentiation is dead. Today, you win with how you sell, not what you sell, and the rest of the message makes the case for that. And we'll get into what the rest of that looks like on the last slide here. So step 3 is message to pain before you message to gain. A huge mistake I see, especially sales development organizations making, is they deliver the end result value message, they lead with that. The problem is the end result does not resonate with somebody who does not have the context that is built up before that, which is usually pain or the realization that an untapped opportunity is leading them to leave a lot of money on the table or something like that. Now, there's a behavioral economics principle at play here. So there's a guy named Daniel Kahneman who coined this term loss aversion. And the short answer is people, not just your customers, but people in general will work twice as hard to avoid losing something than they will to gain a benefit. Okay, so people will work twice as hard to avoid losing something than they will to gain a benefit. So this is a slide that is essentially taken from The Challenger Customer, which is a sales book I would recommend everybody read. It's really powerful. They say most message, first of all, every product or every service or solution is designed to help somebody get from point A, which is the status quo, to point B, which is the desired outcome. And most selling efforts, most messaging efforts overemphasize point B. They're talking about how you can help increase revenue, increase close rates, increase productivity, nail your prospecting process without tearing apart and making the status quo unsustainable and essentially inflicting pain, pouring salt into a wound and cover your ears if you're sensitive, hitting a hammer on their elbow. So the more powerful messaging approach is going to be to tear down the status quo rather than just sell the vision, because that's what triggers this economic or behavioral economic principle of loss aversion. Now, here's the principle that goes along with this when you're talking about pain, and this slide is also worth screenshotting or writing on a sticky note and just returning to every few months or so. If your story or if your message describes your buyer's problem better than they can verbalize it or describe it themselves, they will automatically assume that you have the best solution. Okay, the mental thought process and the feelings it's automatic. And an organization that does this exceptionally well, and I know this is a little bit edgy, so if you're sensitive, again, put the earmuffs on, is Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you look at their quote unquote customer testimonials on their website, what you won't hear is testimonials that talk about the end result or the vision. You will not hear quotes that say things like, AA changed my life, my spouse came back to me, my kids are talking to me again, and my career has skyrocketed. That does not resonate with somebody who has not first been sold on the problem. What works and what you'll see on Alcoholics Anonymous website and brochures and what have you is a story that describes the problem better than the viewer can describe it themselves. That leads to their own self-discovery. So you'll see things that say something like, it started with just a drink or two every Friday night. And that led to getting drunk on the weekends, every weekend. That led to having a few drinks every night after work just to unwind. And before I knew it, I was having 4 or 5 drinks every night. My relationship with my wife or husband was really on the rocks. And that's when I knew something had to change. Now, when somebody with a drinking problem, who has not yet admitted to having a drinking problem, reads something like that, they are likely going to see themselves in the story and come to their own self-discovery, their own realization that they have a problem. That is the exact effect that you should strive to have with your own messaging. Okay, and now finally, step 4, this is the end. This is craft your value message. This is the point B. This is the end result. And if you have followed the previous 3 steps, this is almost a non-event. It's going to be almost trivial as to what that value message is. And the point is, your value message will only work if you first built the context of what's the pain, what's the status quo, what's the from here to there. So I'm going to just break down as the final slide what this could look like in either a prospecting email or a potential cold call or prospecting call. So we start with, hey, John, the reason I'm calling is I noticed the rivalry between you and your competitor is fierce. This goes back to a principle that Julianne voiced at the beginning, which is you get delegated to the person you sound like within the organization. And if you can attach your value proposition to a strategic issue, which competitors almost always are, then you're going to get punted upward in the organization. Now we go to the next part of the message. I hear you have a great product, but you can't rely on it alone to beat your competitor. You know as well as I do, buyers will grind you down on price if your reps don't have bulletproof selling skills. So first of all, we have the nexus embedded within that message, which is what I talked about earlier. Product differentiation is effectively dead. Today, it's about having great conversations. And we've also followed the other principle, which is describe the problem better than they can describe it themselves. When they hear something visceral, like buyers will grind you down on price if your reps don't have bulletproof selling skills, that tugs at their heart almost in a bad way, but in a bad way that's good. It's going to make them respond. It's like, oh, yes, I deal with that all the time. Their heart almost sinks a little bit. And finally, now that we've built that context, we can end with our value message. To beat your competitor, you need insanely great sales conversations. I think we can help. Now, notice that in this message, I didn't say a single thing about my product. I didn't talk about how it works. I didn't even use the word Gong. I just talked about a strategic issue they're dealing with. I flipped their thinking on it. I described the problem better than they could describe it themselves, and then I sold the end result, the value message, the point B. This has been a massively successful message for us when we're selling into highly competitive markets. I recommend you unpack this and try to reconstruct it for your own situation. But just a word of warning, make sure you are building it on the voice of your customers and your market, not mine, because this will likely not work for you if you just take it and try to reapply it in an artificial way. So here's how you can, before we get into the questions and answers, here's how you can win your free ticket to Surf and Sales 3. Go over to gong.io/surfandsales. You'll have to request a demo. By requesting that demo, you will be entered into our raffle. Again, this is a $3,500 value. I'm very jealous. I wish I was going, but I'm going to be at HubSpot's Inbound conference that week. So please go do that right now. Go to gong.io/surfandsales. You're going to see a demo request form. Fill that out, and we will be back with you very shortly as to whether or not you won the free $3,500 ticket. So that brings us to the end. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the questions box right now, and I will start fielding those. Okay, so the first question we have is for Julianne, which is, Julianne, you talked about a few different buyer personas, economic buyer, direct manager, and end user. And you talked about how you like your entry point to be the direct manager best. Can you explain a little bit more about why that is?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think it's important to target them all, because every buyer, every company that you're targeting is going to have a different entry point that's best for them. So do want to make sure that everybody understands you shouldn't neglect by any means an end user. Economic buyers, you want to get them in the sales process as quickly as possible. Don't get me wrong, but an entry point at the direct manager level will usually get you there faster than trying to cold call a CRO. Now, the caveat to that is if you can get an executive level introduction. So if you can get an executive level introduction to a B level or C level type person, you definitely want to target that person that way. But being able to start with the direct manager, they usually have a little more time available, and they also have a better understanding of what the end users are going to experience if and when they implement your product. So it's that mix of having the influence to be able to get the economic buyer on the line quicker than if you cold call them, and also having a good understanding of what's going on.
Great.
But call your VPs and your CXOs too. Don't get me wrong, do that as well.
Colin, so I got another one for you. You talked a lot about buying and essentially building the sales stack that's going to help you build a productivity system. And you gave some great tips about buying, which I think is a very underserved topic that a lot of people need more education on. Do you have any more tips for buying, like whether it's championing people internally, working cross-functionally, any other tips about buying technologies that you want to voice?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because I've actually grown to have a lot of fun buying tools. I think it's from having been on the other side of the equation. It's become really fun. I think I probably am probably the most irritating buyer on the face of the planet when it comes to buying software, because I know exactly what they're doing. I know every move and maneuver and et cetera. And so I think for me, I'm just trying to think that I finished buying everything I need to buy before I give away the tips and tricks, but I think so.
Colin,
Look, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is I think for me, the biggest thing in terms of buying is, number one, take your time, right? Don't be in a rush. When you're in a rush to buy something, that's typically where I've made the most mistakes. And make sure that you're not just jumping on the first thing that you're looking at. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's really easy to get excited by a sales pitch, right? Like you go through it, they tell you all of the great things, none of the bad things. We all know how it goes. But until you see what the other options are, you don't really know which one is the best. And I say that for two reasons. One is you want to make sure you're picking the best tool, but two is when it gets down to getting the best price, if you're only looking at one tool, that negotiation becomes a lot more difficult. Whereas when you can pin them against each other, you can then go ahead and get that better product, and usually for a better price if you're patient, if you're pinning them against each other, and you're not in any rush to jump to sign up. You know, it's really all the things we do in sales, but in reverse. You kind of want to not act as interested as you are. All of those sorts of things play really well with it.
Man, listen to that visceral language. Pin them against each other. Grind them down on price. Like I said, my message must be working because that's exactly what you were going with.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Jameson and Alex know that side of me all too well.
I'm sure they do. They know that side of a lot of different people, I'm sure. Okay, so we have one more question, which I would like to, I'll start with this because I have some opinions, but they're just that. It's an opinion. So if you guys also have differing or even the same opinions to the answer to this question, I'd love to hear it. And I think this is probably going to be the last question we have time to field. Is we shared a lot of information during this webinar. It can almost seem a little bit overwhelming. And the question is, where should somebody get started? What's like the first action or set of actions that they can take to start building this process? Maybe it's because I'm biased toward product marketing, but I think not just with building a prospecting process, but just about everything you do from a go-to-market perspective should always start with your buyer, understanding them deeply, who they are, what their pains are, what their desired gains are, that kind of stuff. I think everything, whether it's product issues, sales issues, or marketing issues, everything comes down to you will win if you understand your buyer at the deepest level. Colin and Julianne, I would love to hear if you have any additional insights on that.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I literally just wrote down understand your buyer. So that's I totally agree. When you think about your process, which is the piece that I spoke at, none of that matters if you're talking to the wrong person within an organization or talking to the right or wrong type of accounts. You have to understand what your buyer's looking for and the challenges that you solve for each of the personas. So 100%, you got to start with understand your buyer.
Yes, I completely agree. You have to understand that. And to give you, I guess, a tactical sort of takeaway on that as well is it depends what stage you're in, right? If you're building a team from scratch, or you have no reps and you're just a first-time sales leader, or you're a CEO that's about to start scaling sales, you really have to just dive in the deep end and start testing things. I always recommend starting with at least 2 sellers. Don't start with just one. You want to be able to measure them against each other. And then from there, you can start to get a sense of what's working and what's not working. It goes back again to that brilliant point that Julianne made about testing things in small batches and testing a few changes at a time. And if you just take your time and week over week, you continue to test, Each week you'll be able to make improvements and refine it. On the flip side of that, if you're coming into a sales organization that already has a lot of salespeople, let's say you have 10 or 20 people and you're coming in as a VP of sales, whether it's to continue scaling the team or to completely rebuild it, at that point you actually have a big advantage. Well, you have an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is you have people to look at. You probably have some data to dig through, and you can start to see what has been working historically and start from there. Use that as your starting point. The disadvantage is that you now have to change a lot of habits, and that, as from a sales training standpoint, can be complicated. But yeah, I would say you combine that with understanding your buyer, and you're probably headed in the right direction.
Well, that leads us to the end here. I want to thank two different entities. I want to thank you and the audience for taking the time to listen to what we had to tell you. I really hope you got some massive value and actionable takeaways that you can start implementing. And then Colin and Julianne, I want to thank you both. You both delivered very rich insights. It was a very strong conversation. So thank you to both of those groups of people for joining today. And we will see you in the next webinar that one of us decides to host.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Julianne. And thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thanks.